Sanctuary. We've all been one of those people that have bricked a socket. We went to the cube recipe, went to Larzuk, and we thought it was going to yield the roll that we wanted to roll that elite GG base, and unfortunately we were met with chaos and sadness and pain behind those eyes. If you're one of those people, well, fortunately you've come to the right place, as today I'm going to talk through some of the key fundamentals to socketing to ensure that we avoid those issues in the future and you have more confidence rolling those GGs moving forward. Let's jump right in. First fundamental in today's discussion is the fact that you cannot leverage the cube recipe to roll a superior base. The only way for you to socket this is to take it to Larzuk, in which case it's going to yield the maximum output, and I will talk about that momentarily. I was blessed in this particular case because I happened to find my 15 EDCV, and because its maximum capacity is 4, I am guaranteed to be able to roll an Insight or an Infinity out of this. However, conversely, we've all been in that situation where you jumped out of your chair because you happened to find a 15 ED Thresher and you rushed to Larzuk to realize that, oh shoot, it's 5 sockets. While yes, you can roll an Obedience in that base and it's still a good temporary element, you cannot actually get a 4 socket out of a 15 ED Thresher, so please keep that in mind. Speaking of Larzuk, there are 3 opportunities in Diablo to acquire these quests, one in Normal, Nightmare, and Hell. Speaking of those normal items again, it's very important to pay attention to the eye level and the monster and area level of where you acquired the item, because once again, Larzuk is always guaranteed to roll the maximum capacity of that base, and I'm going to show you an example in 1 second. Transitioning now into rares, sets, uniques, and crafts, you are only going to get 1 hole punch from Larzuk. Well, yes, I understand you might have that great GG pelt, that elite primal helm, and you want to rush in hopes of getting 2 sockets from Larzuk. It isn't going to happen, so don't crush your dreams. Stick with just the basics. If you want a socket, use it, but you're not going to get 2. To round us out with magical items, you have the opportunity to get 1 or 2 sockets, so it is 50% probability for 2. So you might happen to have an elite type of orb and you want to go have your chances at Larzuk, and I would certainly encourage that if you have the right magic base. However, please don't make the mistake thinking that you can roll and fabricate your own JMod. I've seen this happen where some people have rushed with a 30-20 base to Larzuk to brick a 1 or 2 socket. You cannot manipulate and get your own JMod, as Larzuk will not give you 4 sockets at the quest. Speaking of eye level, here's a very fundamental basic example. Let's say you wanted to get an early game Crystal Sword to roll a Spirit. Because normal sockets are capped at 3, if you were to find a Crystal Sword outside of cows and rush to Larzuk, unfortunately, you would be met with grief because Larzuk is going to grant you with 3 sockets, not 4. However, if you were to find a Crystal Sword in Normal in cows, and you bring that eye level item to Larzuk, you will actually get 4 for the Spirit roll. There are plenty of resources in the wild, and I'm going to link a few of them in the details down below, so if anybody ever wants to look up and confirm where they found their item and what it would actually yield at Larzuk, you'll be able to acquire it in the resources. Next up, I share the sad news that EBUG is no longer a thing in Diablo 2 Resurrected. For those that are not familiar with EBUG, this was something in Lord of Destruction Classic whereby, in the event of rolling 4 sockets, you would get a 1.5 or 50% defense amplification on the base, which was a great way to get ethereal items for your mercenary. In this particular use case, I happened to find a 741 base lacquered last week, and in my roll, I did acquire the 4 sockets, so I'm going to definitely use this for my merc, but you'll notice how the base defense is unchanged at 741. So bear in mind, you can still use the cube recipe to get the sockets, but you're not going to get an increase in defense. Now we have the basic understanding of what can I actually socket. Common sense shows that we can socket our helms, our armors, our melee weapons, or our shields, as those are typically the core. However, you cannot socket a throwing weapon, rings, belts, amulets, etc. You won't hurt anything in trying to use Larzuk or a cube recipe because ultimately nothing will happen, but just be mindful that you ultimately have to focus on the top of this section. Critical fundamental here also is that once an item is socketed, you cannot socket it once again. One important takeaway from today, and it's going to be the back half of this conversation, is what I call the rule of 6. It's a statistical formula to understand the probabilities of actually yielding the types of sockets in different base items, and again, I'm going to walk you through a live visual example on Maxroll. To close this out before we transition, this is from Diablo 2.io, a great database. This is a picture and visual of all the different formulas that are available to you in the cube recipe, and once again, I will link this below. Now, let's get to the rule of 6. The final segment on today's discussion is what I called the rule of 6. Let's first unpack what that means. The base item in the game that can get the most sockets is typically a weapon, or in this case, 6. So the way that this basically works, unbeknownst to you, is that when you do the cube recipe, even though the item might actually have a maximum capacity, not 6, it still goes through the RNG mechanics in its formula to say that it could roll 4, 5, 6, or a different variable. So let's actually hone in on looking at an armor. If we take a Dust Shroud, for example, that is an elite base that has a maximum cap of 4. So if we use the cube recipe here, you'll notice in the grid that it shows you have a 50% chance at 4 sockets. Let me tell you how we get there. So let's say that it rolls a 5 or 6, or in this case a 4. Well, you then have 4, 5, or 6, which translates to 3 out of 6, or in this case, a 50% probability. It is quite simple how this works, but most people tend to overlook the nature of the rule of 6, knowing that this is capped out at 4. Let's go through a more complex example, in this case, a weapon. Because weapons have a variety of use cases and they don't necessarily cap out at 4, you'll notice that all the way to the right, if you were a base, let's say like a Ghost Spear or a War Pike, and you wanted to go for 6, you only have a 1 in 6 opportunity, or in this case, a 16% probability to get it to 6. So there is a little bit more risk associated to that. But let's actually focus on the Thresher example that I used earlier. You obviously want to take your chances, as it is one of the more coveted bases, but you have a 33% chance to roll a 5 socket because that is where it caps. So in that case, again, 5 plus 6, or 2 out of 6, equating to 33%. You only have a 1 in 6 chance, or 16% probability to get the coveted 4. So again, a little bit more variance, a little bit more risk with the bases, but again, being that they are elite and extremely difficult to find, you obviously want to take your chances to roll them if you get the opportunity to acquire them. Next up, we have helms. There is a 3 socket capacity on these, and so when in doubt, if you think about the elite versions of a Bone Visage, a Demon Head, or a Corona, I always encourage you to pick these up, because whether you want to make a dream for yourself or your merc, there is a high 66% probability, or again, a 4 out of 6 chance to roll that. It is one of the highest opportunities on any base items to get that coveted 3, so when in doubt, pick these up and go for it. You're likely going to get the 3. To close us out, let's talk about shields. These are very similar to the same mechanics as armors, as when we think about a White Monarch or a coveted Sacred Targe Paladin shield. Those also have the same capacity of 4, or in that case 50%. Again, 4, 5, or 6 translates to 3 out of 6, or in this case, again, 50% probability. I truly hope you enjoyed today's content. Please don't forget to like or subscribe to the channel. You also can drop any comments or any information below that I may have overlooked or missed, but I appreciate you all tuning in. As I like to say, stay safe, keep grinding, and see vis pacem parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war theory.